Can you tell us about a time where your work created an impact beyond just the revenue, the technology,
I've worked most of my life in public sector.
but most of the time it's somebody who knows delivery, knows the technology, and they're starting the company?
Exactly. Or they've been working in that technology for several years.
The changes that are happening because of AI are so significant. And in the channel business, Salesforce is making billions of dollars of acquisitions because they're afraid of how AI is going to disrupt their existing business. So they're very proactive about it. When consulting firms hit a wall, it's not because they're not good at what they do, but because they haven't chosen how they're going to grow. Tony DiSanza has helped build multiple businesses inside large tech ecosystems. He's grown firms from $0 to $15 million, advised founders as a fractional CRO, and seen the inside of both delivery-led and sales-led growth models. In this episode, we break down what actually works when you're trying to grow inside a large tech channel. How do you build pipeline without relying on luck or only on relationships? What does it take to scale sales beyond the founder's network? And why do so many firms stall out before they ever become real businesses? If you're serious about growth, you don't want to miss this episode. Before we jump in, you know the focus of this show is growing businesses in large tech ecosystems. And one problem I've seen over and over again is that tech partners are all fighting over the same customers, usually those who have signaled a platform purchase or upgrade. But this is where the competition is most fierce. And if you only focus here, your win rates will be low and you'll be leaving money on the table. There's an entire buying life cycle that companies go through, and most tech partners are missing out on the opportunity to capture new customers and add value at all the other stages of this cycle. At Profit Automation, we offer a free strategy session where we teach you about this buying life cycle and give you concrete tactics specific to your situation for getting new customers who are in the less competitive stages of the life cycle. The link is in the show notes. Sign up now before you forget. Tony, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Now, we have a common company in our history, and that is Accenture. I worked at a division of Accenture called Avanade a number of years ago. And so we've both come through that huge organization. It was earlier in your career. I know you've worked from Accenture to running your own firm to having multiple CRO roles. And I'd like to start this show with a little bit of a human interest discussion, because it's easy to get caught in the tech and in all the moving pieces. But can you tell us about a time where your work created an impact beyond just the revenue, the technology, the billable hours, and the outcome for the customer?
I've worked most of my life in public sector. And it's funny, the very first job, since you brought up Accenture, the very first job I had with Accenture was at a retirement system, a state retirement system. And that was, really at the advent of online transactions, right? So they just invested in a mainframe and they have DB2. I mean, that's how old it is. It was about 30 years ago. What's funny, and you've heard the stories about what's going on in the Federal Social Security Administration, that they have these caverns, right? Well, it was the same case where people would call in and ask to retire. And what they would literally do is have to go to files on different floors to just try to get paperwork on their retirement benefits, their work history, and different things like that. So one of the first jobs was creating a system, and this is, again, before the advent of CRMs and true retirement systems. It's literally building it from scratch. And, back then in the 90s, Accenture had their own CASE, a computer-aided software engineering tool called Foundation One.
Okay.
And it was understanding, building this architecture to allow people, residents of the state, to retire. So this was the first step, which is calculating their retirement benefits and setting them up and then transitioning them to be a retiree. They called it retirants at that time. So, that was my very first project in public sector. And I felt so rewarding because I was able to help the citizens of the state create a better experience, realize a better experience, because now we were computerizing it, whereas much of it was manual processing. So that went to a whole lot of other public sector and higher ed type of roles, where I was really more focused on how do the systems that we deploy benefit those constituents, more so than help the company make money.
Yeah.
It's always been more of how do I avoid cost then, generate revenue.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see how that would be really rewarding. I mean, if people are having to wait for their benefits or their errors in the system, there's going to be some human impact of that down the line, which is going to be frustrating for people. Anything we do in technology, especially in a large company like that, should be focused on those rewards for the people that we're trying to do it for. But it's easy to lose sight of that. When you think about growing in the channel, in your experience, what's different about growing inside a large tech ecosystem like Oracle or, previously PeopleSoft, where you've spent a lot of time? How is that different than growing a different kind of business?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I think for most of my career, I had been really growing into those or growing while being in those ecosystems. I started out with Accenture and then moved to IBM. And in both of those cases, we were, Oracle and other ERP solution providers. So we developed those relationships. When I went to another company, called Blackwell Consulting Services, much smaller. But what changed was we were subject matter experts in PeopleSoft for higher ed, and that built that allowed us to grow significantly because we had a reputation that we knew what we were doing. And
Yeah. With that specific customer, like what you're talking about is you had a niche or a niche in that
yeah,
space. And even though you weren't big, it gave you a lot of credibility with those potential customers.
exactly. And I think, while we were prepping for this call, we talked a lot about how you grow, especially when you're starting out. Being recognized as a specialist or have deep experience in a specific topic or technology is always a good start to the process.
Yeah. Is that the only time that you've worked in that scenario where you had that tight niche of focus on a certain kind of customer, or have you done that throughout your career?
Several companies I started, and I used that one first because that was a niche more so on PeopleSoft in higher education.
Yeah.
PeopleSoft being an Oracle product that, actually a predecessor before Oracle bought it, but it is now. But then later on, it became more specialized in that software too. I started two different companies with that, saying, we are specialists in PeopleSoft. I built up a network of talent that allowed me to do that. And it continues to this day. I mean, seriously, this is literally 30 years now that I've been off and on working with PeopleSoft as an example,
Hmm.
So that's always a good start. But obviously, things like that or technologies evolve and you need to stay current or you need to stay ahead of the pace. And so sometimes we picked up other technologies. About 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I invested in an open source ERP solution. That was at the advent when also Workday was coming into play. And then really now it's AI, right? And if you're not involved in AI, and I don't mean just tangentially involved with AI, but really starting to deploy in a consulting IT services, you really need to have experience. You need to because customers are really looking for those people that know what they're talking about, not people that says, "Oh, we can do that. Trust us."
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody's actually done it before. You grew one company that you worked for. You can say the name if you want to. I'm not going to say it, but you told me one company you grew from 0 to 15 million in revenue as the growth or sales leader there. Now, I've seen a lot of these kind of companies whose growth is a little bit capped by the founder's network size. For example, as you've talked about, going out to people and starting the business that way. In that growth, when you had so much success going from 0 to $15 million, did this company just have a great network, or did you have other strategies for growth? And how did you fit those together to get to $15 million in revenue?
It was a combination of things because, first of all, even to this day, small business there are small business set asides. So, when you are looking at doing a business, and again, it depends on the industry that you're pursuing and the customers you're pursuing. We did a lot of work in government, right? As I said before, public sector. And since that's my experience, I said, well, let's continue down that path. And the company I mentioned, Blackwell Consulting Services, um, was owned, African American owned, and and did great. They were based in Chicago, and then we created Blackwell Consulting Services of Ohio as a basically a standalone company, and we were registered as a minority-owned business, even as an 8A, which is a federally owned minority-owned business. So that allowed us to be competitive. So one, we had the qualifications, we had the references, but then we were a small business set aside where at that time customers were looking for those type of experience and skills. And legitimately in the government, they had these 5, 10, 15% set aside. So we'd market ourselves like, if you have these, not only are we a small business or a minority owned business, but we have these skills and we've done it. And so I did two things. So we would compete on our own, and we won a $2 million job at a public school system in Ohio. And that was all as a prime. But, many times we were a subcontractor. So, we were on a $150 million deal. Part of it is we're on large jobs because that type of technology is costly. It's expensive. And when you look at, deploying an ERP solution, it's not 10,000, 50,000. It's, half a million and up, depending upon, again, the size and scope.
Yeah.
So that's why it was easier versus if I had said, I was a web developer and I started a web development company, that is where the ticket size of a deal is maybe 5 to 10,000. And so you'd have to really grow significantly or rapidly to achieve that financial
Yeah.
goals.
Yeah, that's right. Um, you've helped companies grow in multiple ways. Let's talk about delivery led versus sales led growth, because we talked about that a little bit in in the last call that we had. How do you know which path to take? How do you utilize, I mean, if they're both valid, how do you utilize both of them? I'd love to hear your take on that, because the reality is most founders or most leaders in these consulting firms in any channel are usually they usually were delivery first, right? They're usually not a salesperson starting the company. Sometimes it is, but most of the time it's somebody who knows delivery, knows the technology, and they're starting the company because they like the technology.
Exactly. Or they've been working in that technology for several years for
Yep.
another company, and then it said, we could go out on our own. And there's a lot
Yep.
of that, right? Because again, supply and demand, if you're in specific technologies now, like you're a full stack developer or you're in data analytics, anybody can start their own consulting firm and keep themselves busy. And, when they have a good relationship with the customer and the customer says, I really have this thing or this thing. And they say, we can help you there. The downside of the delivery based is you still have to always be selling. You always have to
Yep.
be looking at that next job. You may sign a 1 year contract with a customer. Their economic issues are outside of your control. I had that where I did sign a 1 year contract. I was a consultant to a university, and after 9 months, they were having financial difficulties, and they laid off several consultants, and I was one of them. So you have to decide. Okay, well, you're hit with this. What do I do? Right? Well, you can call up and go to your next network, but that again, that's always selling, and that's all free time. The industrious delivery person is always got their hands on fingers in a lot of different things. The sales based approach, what that means is that you go out, start selling, finding opportunities, and then you assemble the team. And if you do a good job, you have a team of resources that can deliver that you could vouch for. Because I think the other part is, on the sales based approach, if you don't know who's delivering, you're suspect to over promising and under delivering, and then nobody's going to buy from you.
Yeah.
So that's really hard. So it's a it really is a nuance as to which way do you want to be. What I found is that I go back and forth. Like I'm fractional right now, so I do some delivery, but I also do I'm always looking for sales. As a CRO, I'm always looking for opportunities, right? But I'm happy to go for opportunities for people that are paying for me to do that, plus also manage the team. But delivery side, I think that's always, if you're good in technology and you're good in delivery, that's always the best way to start first. But then recognize that you should set aside some money to either pay somebody to continue to try to find leads for you, or now there's a lot more ways to do it without paying for somebody to be a dedicated salesperson.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, shameless plug, but that's what Profit Automation does. My agency is we do those kind of services for companies, and if you're not always selling, then you're going to come to the end of this current set of work that you have, and then you're going to go back into sales mode, and you're going to have lumpy revenue. When you think about the most successful companies that you've worked for or built for, what were the characteristics that made them so successful?
I'll tell you, I've worked for some large global consulting providers. I've worked for IBM, Accenture, Cognizant, and Wipro. And each one of those have a different DNA. But I think for me, Accenture was the best example. And I know that the usual complaint is that Accenture charges high fees and employs kids right out of college. But the DNA of those kids out of college, and I was too. I had just finished my master's degree when I joined Accenture. Is that
Okay.
incredibly hard workers and incredibly intelligent. And what you get from that is, it's funny, is like I finished my master's degree and then I joined Accenture. And then after 2 years of working at Accenture, I said to myself, and I still to this day say, I didn't need a master's degree. By going to work for Accenture, that is your master's degree. Because not only did they teach you, but they, there was a work ethic was hard to duplicate, no matter where else I was in, every other organization.
Hmm.
So that was the first part. So when you look at it, and we were ethical. I mean, when Accenture was founded, I joined. It was called Anderson Consulting,
Yeah.
and as it was going becoming Accenture, but it was we had these our mission, vision, and value statement. And the fact that I remember all this is people, process, and technology. And I wish I remember what the mission statement was, but fundamentally, it's about delivering, ensuring that the customer realizes value. Okay. So if you're always going with the point that you work hard, of course you're going to get paid, but what you're doing uh, means that the customer realizes value. I think to me it's paramount, because then you're putting the client's interests ahead of your own.
And you saw that as a culture of two things that I've kind of pulled out from what you just said. The thing that made Accenture so successful from your point of view is that they had a culture of, number one, hard work. There was a strong work ethic. And then number two, they worked hard for the customer. They weren't
Yes.
they weren't self-interested first.
I mean, maybe, and don't get me wrong. I mean, obviously everybody thinks about, oh, I want to make this deal. I want to win this work. But,
Yeah.
when you're there working, all you care about is that the client realizes value, because otherwise they're not going to cut. One, they won't give you a good reference. They're going to badmouth you, and they may even sue you. And nobody wants any of those things. We want them to say things positively because they all talk, and you want that next job, right? So,
Yeah.
whether it's
100%.
starting out and saying, I got to do the best job I can for this person because they're going to be my next reference or my first reference,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Absolutely. Uh, Talking about references and the need for you to have a good reputation when you're running this kind of services business, most partners, they grow mostly through referrals. And a lot of times, well, that is the best source of any customer. I mean, hands down. I don't think anybody would argue with that. But a lot of times it's hard to control the flow of referrals. How have you seen anybody successfully kind of supplement a referral based business with more intentional kinds of pipeline building, or more consistent systems of pipeline building? Or is there a way to juice your referral pipeline so that you're getting more instead of just when you're lucky enough to get one that comes in the door every quarter or something like that?
Well, again, it's hard for me to fully answer that question. And I'll explain is that, when you're implementing some of these larger software solutions like Salesforce and the ERP solutions, they have their own customer satisfaction, right? And they have a partner channel. So because of it, you're always driving to make sure you're a 4 out of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars, especially in the Salesforce ecosystem, right? Because it's not about that referral is going to lead to initial business, but it's going to establish you as um, a valued uh, systems integrator. Okay, so that's the first part is recognizing that. Now, if you're in smaller and you're right, it's like when we say referral or reference, those are really two different words, right? A referral is a client is talking to somebody else, a current client is talking to somebody else, and they say, "Hey, you know what? This I was talking to my peer in San Antonio, and they were telling me they're interested in Salesforce, and they're willing to take a call from you if I told them good things." That is always obviously the best type of
That's the best.
referral, right?
Yeah.
Again, in public sector, when you are bidding or submitting proposals that are, and you know what, it's actually in many businesses, it's not just in technology. I'll say the same thing. I need somebody to replace my windows. What do? I ask them for 3 references, right? And those are references, but those are the same thing because they positive positive feedback goes a long way. I was researching. I know I'm a little off topic, but I was researching, a lead based business, and the people I talked to were so exuberant about this company. I said, okay, I got to use them, um, but I haven't done it yet, which is funny. Uh,
But if you do
but
it, it's going to be
anyway,
them.
yeah. So you really want to do 2 things. If you're in again competitive procurement, you use them as references. What the referrals are going to be a little bit different. Where you're right, you also don't want to be, hey, I did this work for you and I cut my deal. Do you have anything new, or do you know anybody else? But it's the other way of recognizing, okay, your customer may be, within the nonprofit community. For example, I did a website for a company. I charged them $5,000 for it because my company was just getting into the market, and I knew that she was, into the network within the community, and she hooked me up with 2 other things because of that. But you can't go back to the well too often unless they become really good friends for you.
Yeah, right. Okay. Now what about the supplementing the referral based sales pipeline with something more intentional, outbounding, some kind of lead generation? Have you seen, tactics that work well for companies to kind of fill in the consistency of their pipeline in between these referrals that might or might not come?
Yeah, and like I said, I wouldn't rely on the referrals. I would just use them as the reference.
Yeah.
If you do get a referral, it's the same person, right? But the difference is that what I found, and you probably know the same thing in sales, when you try to do outbound and you identify somebody that may be in need of your services, they're going to ask, okay, where have you done this before, right?
100%. Yeah.
Before you approach them, that's what you're saying is like, hey, I've brought these companies, I've reduced. One of the things we have is a white glove recruitment service where basically, the companies don't need to invest in an HR department or recruiters. They just come to us, and I save them, 70 to 80% of their time because there's no job description creation. There's no initial screening. There's no paying for job boards. We take care of all that, and we give them 3 to 5 candidates that have been vetted based upon their requirements, and then all they need to do is interview 5. So time to hire goes from months to days or weeks. So that's significant. And every time you do the outbound, you sell that. It's like how about if I show you how we can allow you to save time? And you know what? Call this person. He could vouch for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's always the most helpful thing because people just trust people. And if you don't have that, it's always harder to get started. If we didn't talk about AI, we'd probably be leaving a lot of value on the table because that's one of the things that people are most concerned about today, not only in this industry, but in all industries. The changes that are happening because of AI are so significant. And in the channel business, Salesforce is making billions of dollars of acquisitions because they're afraid of how AI is going to disrupt their existing business. So they're very proactive about making changes and adding new technologies to their stack and preparing for this AI driven future. SAP just came out with their AI assistant inside of their platform. Um, all channel companies are thinking very, very intensely about AI right now. How is this going to impact the channel business? Have you seen indications already that things are going to change for partners like those operating in the Oracle or the SAP or the Microsoft channel?
Yeah, and it's probably in a couple of different ways that you look at it. And first and foremost, it's recognizing that some of these technology AI is either replacing or supplementing or wholly changing what that process is because of what it can do. So if you know how to implement that or integrate it, then you're going to get more work out of it, right? And I'm not saying using AI to like code and is it going to replace coders and things like that. It may, okay, but at the end of the day, some of that is you also have to have good prompts and you got to be able to, explain things, which goes back to there still are humans involved in that. Okay, so
Yeah.
different steps are going to require AI to change things. On the HR side, for example, again, because I'm an ERP and a CRM guy, I think about a lot of those processes more so than some of the other phenomenal things. So, in HR, for example, how can AI change the way you onboard? You hire an individual and then employ them, and do things like how do you skill the workforce and continue to supplement your workforce? So there are things to do there that you know people are always going to have systems that track the people that they manage, right, or they employ. Um, but it's getting people to skill up to where they're going that is going to be the most they're going to be the most successful. And unfortunately, that means then we'll see that divide, right? The
Yeah.
companies that can spend can do these things. The small businesses can't. But then they can, but things will change. And what I mean by that is, back in the day, we saw ERP systems that, you had to have $1 million to buy something that now you don't. You can, so I did a lot of work in higher ed. And, there's 5 core areas: recruiting, student financials, student information or registration, financial aid, advancement. Okay, and there's probably one other: campus community, which is all about communication and growth.
Yeah.
Each one of those was part of a full blown ERP system. Now you can pick and choose, and each one of those is going to be a lot less costly because they're going to also integrate AI with it. So recruiting, now that AI with a CRM, and marketing, and the advent of where do your students, what are they searching for? What do they want? AI gives you better insight to that. I don't want to say it again in a blanket approach, but again, when you can tune it to your mission, you'll be more successful.
100%. Yeah. Now, there are things that are happening already in the consulting space that probably require some deep thought and some planning on where this is going. For example, we talked about Accenture, no longer part of what used to be called the Big Five, as I remember it, but the Big Four consulting firms, the Big Four tax and accounting firms, they're no longer hiring junior people out of college for consulting. They're using AI across the board for that. Huge change. And I kind of heard that through word of mouth. I haven't dug into it yet, but I've heard it from several different sources. Very interesting development, in the space. We've seen other developments even before AI, like in the Microsoft space. I was speaking to a guest just about a week ago who was telling me about when Microsoft moved from, a lot of their CRM work, they kind of moved it into the citizen developer model, where all of a sudden a company could go that used to be able to go and charge $150 to $200 an hour for some of this configuration work. No longer could they do that. It's more like $25, $50 an hour if they can do it at all. And so these things are happening. AI is going to probably accelerate a lot of that kind of change. How is a company going to stay on high margin and high value services? And how are they, like, what's going to change with staffing or things like that?
What's going to change with staffing? I think that's an excellent question. That you see that, and it's just like stocks, right? Where it's high demand means the prices go up, and low supply. And I think stocks are the wrong thing, but any kind of good and
Yeah.
service. Typically, scarcity breeds higher prices. So, like, mainframe programmers 30 years ago were making a bunch of money, and now they're lucky to make $50 an hour.
Hmm.
I think website development is the same way. I know I was talking with an AI specialist, and he wants 300 to 400,000. Okay, so you're going to see that, but that happens all the time, where you have that supply and demand, and people realize, hey, you know what? I'm also, going to get work for offshore, right? Whereas it may cost, the advent of Upwork and uh, other places like that allow you, if you're good, you can use people offshore for a fraction of the money.
Yeah.
So what do we need, as from a tech community? And this is always been one of my passions, is how do we make sure that the citizens, the kids growing up, are going to be profitable, right? Are going to be not profitable, excuse me, but going to be able to earn a living, and that comes from continued training and going where the market is going. And I say all that, and the funny thing is, I have a son who's now 31, and that's the way that I thought. I thought he'd grow up to be a programmer, but you know what he is? He's a finished car. He does finished carpentry work, so he's really a precision artisan. And when you look at where the community is going, that 30 years ago, I was just having this debate with somebody that it was kind of considered um, a, a dig if you were in the trades, if you were a plumber, if you were a thing. And what I would say to that is, if you're getting educated, you go again where the market's going. So, if you like being an electrician, you go, because AI is going to create work outside of just the technology community. But when you look at the technology community, there's still going to be data analysis um, and ways to implement all these different types of technologies more than just AI.
Yeah, 100%. I like the way you where you went with that with supply and demand, because while supply for some things may be, over provided or oversupplied,
Oversaturated, yeah.
yeah, oversaturated, there's going to be this demand for these other things that, there was never such a thing before. So like the AI developer that you talked about, who wants three to
Yeah,
four hundred thousand dollars for his work, that is a job that didn't exist 5 years ago, at least
and
not
I look
not
at,
in any mainstream way.
when I post a job for a full stack developer, I get anywhere from 500 to 1,000 applicants for one position.
Wow.
Whereas I post something for something more discrete, AI or data engineer, you're not going to get that, but they'll also pay a lot of money for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Tony, this has been really great. I appreciate you coming on. It's been really illuminating some of your thoughts on how to build a business, what's going to change with AI, and the best tactics that you've seen across your career building multiple companies in the channel. So thank you for being here and sharing your expertise today.
Thank you, Andrew. Have a great day.
Okay, you too.